The human had never considered himself a hero. He was a simple medic, the kind who patched up scratches and bruises on space travelers for a small fee, and occasionally administered energy boosters that smelled suspiciously like cola. His hands were steady enough, his knowledge of bandages adequate, and his bedside manner charming in an awkward, fumbling kind of way. He liked to think that he was competent, even if slightly clumsy, which was why he was entirely unprepared for the alien warrior who crashed through the door of his small clinic, bleeding and growling in a language he couldn't understand. She was enormous, muscles coiled under armor that looked like it had been scavenged from 3 different planets, and scars streaked across her greenish-purple skin that glinted under the clinic's fluorescent lights. He blinked. Okay, this is new," he muttered to himself, rolling up his sleeves. The warrior's eyes were wide, amber, and terrifyingly sharp. She was breathing hard, and the human could see that even the slightest touch might cause pain, or worse. He gingerly knelt beside her, holding a tray of antiseptics and bandages. "I just need to clean your wounds," he said, attempting a smile that he hoped conveyed confidence rather than panic. She tilted her head, a curious mixture of suspicion and wariness in her gaze, then suddenly hissed something that sounded like a challenge. He froze, unsure if it was a greeting, a threat, or an alien insult. "I mean, I'm friendly." "Totally friendly," he stammered, holding out a sterile wipe. Her eyes narrowed, then she flinched dramatically as he touched a jagged scar along her shoulder. She hissed again, and he flinched in return, nearly dropping the wipe. The room was suddenly alive with tension, a mix of fear, confusion, and something that felt suspiciously like electricity. "Okay," he muttered to himself. "Just a simple stitch. No magic, no romance, no whatever that thing is she's doing." The first stitch went in smoothly, and he let out a sigh of relief. That relief lasted approximately 2 seconds before she leaned forward and pressed herself slightly closer. He froze again. The warrior's face was only inches from his, her breathing heavy, her eyes fixed on him in a way that made his stomach twist. She reached out, not aggressively, but with intent, and gently adjusted the bandage. Her fingers brushed his hand, and he jerked back like a startled child. She hissed softly, a sound that could have been anger or approval, and he had no idea which. Then she did the unthinkable. She knelt fully on the floor, head bowed, and pressed both hands to the ground. The human's eyebrows shot up. Was this a prayer? A surrender? A threat? No. She raised her head, eyes gleaming, and in heavily accented common she said, "I swear my loyalty to you for life. You have my service, my devotion, my strength." The human blinked. "Wait, what?" "I am yours," she said simply. "Forever loyal. You have healed me, and therefore you are my master." He choked on the antiseptic smell and waved a hand frantically. Whoa! I didn't. Look, I'm not your master. I just fixed your arm. That's all. It's literally just stitches." But she was already standing and moving closer again, bowing and straightening repeatedly as though demonstrating her commitment. Every gesture was exaggerated, intimate, and completely incomprehensible to him. She touched his forearm lightly, then stepped back, then returned with a deep, ceremonial bow. He backed up a step, then another, then tripped slightly over a chair. "Oh no. Oh no. This is bad," he muttered, brushing himself off. "I'm not ready for whatever this is. I'm a medic, not a romantic thing. And definitely not alien loyalty leader." But she didn't understand hesitation. In her species, being healed by someone automatically signaled a deep bond. Healing was sacred, intimate, and binding, and by fixing her wounds, he had unknowingly triggered a lifetime of allegiance. She tilted her head, studying him as though reading his thoughts. Her gaze was intense, personal, and embarrassingly close. He could feel the faint heat of her skin through the armor. He swallowed hard, trying not to notice, trying to ignore the way his pulse quickened in response to her unwavering attention. He attempted to move toward his supplies, pretending to focus on bandages, but every small action was interpreted by her as guidance or instruction. When he handed her a glass of water, she took it with both hands, lowering herself gracefully into another bow that positioned her way too close to him. "You must teach me. Show me how to follow. Show me how to honor you," she said, eyes gleaming with a mix of sincerity and something more mischievous. The human pinched the bridge of his nose. This was not what he had signed up for. He had been prepared for minor injuries, maybe some mild alien eccentricities, but not this. She was incredibly strong, surprisingly fast, and completely devoted. And judging by the way she was leaning slightly closer every time he moved, she might also be sexually invested. He tried to take a step back, hoping to restore professional distance, but she mirrored him effortlessly, each movement perfectly aligned, as if shadowing him on instinct. He realized, with growing horror, that his simple act of healing had unleashed a tidal wave of devotion. She was now utterly loyal, entirely enamored, and ready to follow him through the galaxy if he so much as nodded. And the human, for the first time, felt both pride and absolute panic in equal measure. "Well, this is going to be interesting," he muttered under his breath. She tilted her head, apparently sensing that he was talking to himself, and smiled faintly, a dangerous, teasing curve of lips that made him regret every bandage he had ever applied. He sighed, realizing that his ordinary life of patching cuts and offering minor medical advice was gone forever. From this point onward, every stitch, every small gesture, every glance would carry weight he couldn't control. And the warrior standing before him, gleaming, loyal, and dangerously close, was entirely convinced he was her teacher, her guide, and perhaps even something more. He had barely caught his breath from the loyalty oath when she announced that healing alone was insufficient. According to her, being patched up created a sacred responsibility, a lifelong obligation to serve and honor him in ways that were entirely unnecessary, and yet entirely unavoidable. She had decided that he was not only her healer but also her teacher, and he had no choice in the matter. The first lesson began awkwardly. She stood before him, arms crossed, glaring as though daring him to refuse. He tried to explain that human etiquette was simple: say please, say thank you, don't stab strangers, but she shook her head vigorously, as if he were holding back some profound secret. "No," she said firmly, her voice resonating like a polished battle horn. "I must learn everything. Folding, speaking, walking, eating. Every human action must be demonstrated to me, for your guidance is essential." He swallowed and nodded nervously. "Okay, let's start with something simple. Folding a napkin." She leaned forward eagerly. As he demonstrated, she mimicked him with alarming precision. Only it wasn't precision in the human sense. It was precision in the alien warrior sense, which involved exaggerated bowing, overextended arms, and sudden shifts in stance that made him step back repeatedly to avoid accidental contact. Every minor adjustment of a napkin somehow translated into her inching closer, her massive amber eyes focused on him with a devotion that was simultaneously flattering and terrifying. "Like this," he said, trying to keep calm as she reached her hands near his chest. "And, fold it carefully. That's all. Just fold it." Her hands brushed his sleeve, and he flinched, then realized she had tilted her body in a way that put her dangerously close, almost touching him where he very much didn't want to be touched. She smiled faintly, a mischievous curl of her lips that made him grit his teeth and hope the lesson would end quickly. "Is this pleasing to you?" she asked softly. I don't know what you mean," he stammered, trying to hide the racing of his pulse. He knew exactly what she meant, and the thought made him recoil even more. The next exercise was even worse. Eating. She insisted that learning human dining etiquette was essential to loyalty. He showed her how to lift a fork properly, how to chew quietly, and how not to slurp. She tried to imitate him but somehow turned it into a bizarre performance art. Every bite was punctuated with dramatic hand gestures, exaggerated eye contact, and small sighs that he was almost certain were meant to convey devotion, if not outright attraction. When he complimented her technique, just the innocent human, "good job," she interpreted it as praise of her body, or perhaps her essence, and bowed again, this time with an alarming bend that placed her shockingly close to him. "Remember," she said in a whisper, leaning forward as if imparting a secret. "Every lesson, every gesture, every moment is for you. I exist to improve, to honor, to—" She paused, eyes flashing. "Please you." The human swallowed hard and straightened his back, trying to maintain professional distance. "I really don't need pleasure. This lesson, please, just eat your food." It only got worse. Hygiene came next, because apparently a loyal alien warrior must know human bathing customs. He tried to demonstrate modesty, standing behind a shower screen, gesturing at the process rather than the details, but she misinterpreted every move. Hands reached, adjustments were made, and every brush of skin or accidental contact sent him into a spiral of embarrassment. By the time he managed to finish, he was sweating in places he didn't know could sweat, and she was beaming proudly, entirely convinced he had approved of every step in a highly personal way. Cooking was another disaster. She insisted that learning human cuisine was part of her devotion. She threw herself into the task with a zeal that would have been inspiring if the end result weren't explosive. Flour coated the walls, alien spices reacted with the oven in ways that set off alarms, and he found himself dodging molten batter while trying to instruct her not to slice her claws on the countertop. Every compliment he offered to calm her, every attempt to steady her hands, was taken as flirtation. By the end, the kitchen resembled a battlefield, with remnants of alien ingredients smoldering on the floor and him sitting on the counter trying to catch his breath. Massage practice was next. According to her, a loyal alien warrior must understand human musculature to provide both healing and comfort. He tried to demonstrate basic techniques, keeping them strictly professional, but she misread every instruction as an invitation. Hands pressed too hard, elbows landed where they shouldn't, and he found himself in a series of awkward positions he was pretty sure violated several galactic codes of personal space. When he protested gently, she looked shocked, as though he were denying her devotion, and repeated the same motions with even more intensity. By mid-afternoon, he was a puddle of nerves and sweat. She, on the other hand, was radiant, every movement a mix of pride, concentration, and inappropriate loyalty gestures. She misinterpreted pauses, glances, and sighs as subtle encouragement, and he realized that this entire training session was a carefully orchestrated series of escalating erotic misunderstandings. And yet, through the chaos, he noticed something remarkable. Despite the flustered panic, the near-catastrophic cooking, and the painfully intimate lessons, there was genuine admiration in her eyes. She respected his skill, his patience, and even his awkward humanity. That thought made him pause, and for a moment, he allowed himself to smile at her devotion. He just hoped it wasn't a smile that would be interpreted as approval of more lessons. By the end of the day, she knelt again, bowing her head low and muttering promises of continued service, guidance, and learning. He pinched the bridge of his nose. "I'm going to need a vacation," he muttered, knowing full well that the warrior would interpret it as a playful invitation for more training sessions tomorrow. And he was terrified. He thought the training sessions were bad. He thought the kitchen explosions and awkward massages were the peak of his misery. He was wrong. Completely, catastrophically wrong. The warrior had decided that loyalty was not something to practice in private, it was something to demonstrate publicly, and she was determined to show the galaxy just how devoted she was to him. The first incident occurred at a galactic market. He was innocently picking up some supplies, a loaf of bread, a few energy crystals, and something he hoped was edible for humans, when she appeared at his side, armor gleaming, eyes locked on him with that unwavering devotion. She bowed so deeply that her forehead nearly touched the counter. The vendor blinked. The human blinked. He tried to wave it off. She's, just training?" "Yes, training." She ignored him completely. Loyalty, in her mind, required him to be constantly honored. She insisted on carrying every item he purchased, despite the fact that she was twice his size and every movement created a low, terrifying hum of power. Every time he attempted to reach for something, she intercepted it, bowing and murmuring, Your will is my guide. Your preference is my command. By the time he reached the register, the line behind them was long and muttering. Several vendors whispered about the strange, overzealous warrior, some staring with curiosity, others with clear alarm. He tried to explain. She's, my student? Yes, student. But she misinterpreted this as praise and took a more dramatic kneel, one that positioned her a little too close, just enough to make him flinch again. The chaos escalated when she insisted on protecting him from perceived threats. A delivery droid bumped into him accidentally, and she spun on it, claws extended in a theatrical display of menace. The droid retreated with sparks flying, the human ducked under a display of floating fruit crates, and the market erupted into shouts. Meanwhile, she stood proudly over him, chest heaving, clearly pleased that she had demonstrated her loyalty and strength. He muttered under his breath, "I just wanted bread." By the time they returned to the small living quarters he had barely managed to keep functional, he realized the true scope of her devotion. She followed him everywhere, shadowing his every move. When he tried to cook again, this time attempting something simple like scrambled eggs, she insisted on supervising. Her massive claws, precise and strong, managed to break every utensil he handed her. Ingredients flew in every direction, some combusting in a spectacular flare of alien spice reaction. He dodged hot splatters while she stood over him, hands on her hips, grinning as if it were a test of loyalty. Every accidental touch, every singed hair, every panicked glance seemed to her like proof of affection. When he retreated to rest, she had prepared what she called a healing ritual, which involved stretching exercises and a massage that was far too intimate for human comfort. Hands pressed too firmly, elbows collided with sensitive areas, and he realized that she had a rather warped but highly devoted interpretation of what helping him recover meant. He squirmed, protested softly, and she misinterpreted every flinch as playful teasing, prompting her to increase intensity. Even in moments when he thought he might finally be alone, she would appear. He once tried to enjoy a quiet drink, only to find her kneeling next to him, reciting a loyalty oath while offering him a strangely glowing alien beverage. Every sip he took was punctuated by her gaze, unwavering and unwaveringly intense. Every gesture of politeness, every attempt at minimal affection, was magnified into an elaborate act of devotion. He began to realize that no space, no wall, no corner of existence was safe from her enthusiastic loyalty. Amid all this chaos, however, there was a strange rhythm. Despite the public mishaps, the destroyed kitchen, and the constant invasive loyalty rituals, he noticed the warrior's admiration. Her devotion was not mindless. It was thoughtful, carefully observing his patience, his cleverness in improvising, and his attempts to remain composed amid absurdity. There was something undeniably touching about it, even if the execution was terrifying. He found himself laughing in moments of sheer exasperation, appreciating the bizarre intimacy forming between them. Then came the night. The warrior insisted that full loyalty required a demonstration of trust, which translated into a ridiculous evening-long series of intimate rituals in his quarters. Stretching exercises, balance routines, and overly aggressive attempts at massage intertwined with whispered promises and unintended touches. He tried to maintain boundaries, but every movement she made, every sigh, every careful glance, pulled him further into the absurd adult tension. Somehow, through the chaos, the bond grew. He began to playfully test her devotion, suggesting tiny tasks that were perfectly innocent in human terms but dangerously intimate in alien interpretation. She responded with eagerness, eyes wide and attentive, interpreting every word as approval, every glance as encouragement. The tension became a game. He would flinch, she would misread it, he would sigh, she would intensify, and through it all, laughter punctuated the tension, easing it just enough to keep him from panicking entirely. By dawn, he realized something remarkable. Despite the chaos, the panic, and the relentless intensity of her loyalty, he had come to enjoy her presence. The way she misinterpreted gestures, the absurd public demonstrations, even the over-the-top massages, it was oddly comforting, in a bizarre, twisted way. He had survived alien loyalty, survived public embarrassment, survived culinary disasters, and somehow, he found himself smiling at the thought of another day of lessons, loyalty, and completely inappropriate devotion. He sat on the edge of his bed, rubbing his temples, and muttered, "I'm in way over my head, and yet maybe this is exactly where I'm supposed to be." The warrior, kneeling faithfully at his feet, looked up at him with a grin that was both terrifying and endearing. She had proven that loyalty could be extreme, public, and chaotic, but in the middle of all that madness, she had also shown a spark of genuine affection. He groaned softly. Tomorrow is going to be worse." He had tried to prepare himself for the day, bracing for whatever new ritual or absurd loyalty test she might invent, but nothing could have prepared him for the chaos that unfolded. The warrior had decided that the ultimate demonstration of devotion required a final evaluation of her commitment, and in her mind, there was no better way to prove loyalty than with a series of escalating, ridiculous, and painfully intimate tasks. It began with a mock battle, right in the middle of his tiny living quarters. She leapt from counter to counter, brandishing imaginary weapons, shouting her own battle cries with a ferocity that sent him diving behind furniture for cover. He tried to dodge flying limbs, overturn chairs, and stray utensils while shouting, Wait! This isn't necessary!" She ignored him entirely, interpreting his evasive maneuvers as playful encouragement, a test of her skill and dedication. By the time she landed gracefully on the floor, bowing deeply before him, he was panting, hair disheveled, and questioning every decision in his life that had led to this point. She took his hands in hers, massive, calloused, impossibly strong hands, and pressed them against her armor in what she called a seal of fidelity. The human froze, blinking rapidly. The gesture was both intimate and ceremonial, and he had no frame of reference for what was appropriate. He tried to step back, but she moved with him, matching his every motion flawlessly. Then came the ritual of care, which involved stretching exercises, deep breathing, and what she insisted were therapeutic massages meant to align his human energy with her alien essence. Hands pressed too firmly, elbows collided with sensitive spots, and every brush of skin was magnified in intensity. He flinched, stammered, and tried to explain boundaries, but she misinterpreted each reaction as playful teasing. She intensified her efforts, laughing softly when he turned crimson, a sound that was equal parts pride and mischief. Cooking followed. Somehow, in her mind, ultimate devotion required preparing a meal that honored both their species. She produced a combination of alien ingredients that smelled like molten metal and burned incense, declaring it a delicacy. He tried to intervene, offering human substitutes, but she waved them away with a determined smile. The final product was edible in the technical sense but highly incendiary, and he spent most of the meal fanning smoke away while she beamed with satisfaction, utterly convinced that he was enjoying every bite. Even in the middle of these disasters, the human began to notice the charm in her devotion. She wasn't just obeying blindly, she was attentive, observing the smallest details, responding to his cues, even if she misinterpreted them in hilarious, overly intimate ways. When he smiled despite himself at her antics, she took it as a sign of approval and redoubled her efforts. When he groaned or flinched, she interpreted it as playful encouragement, which somehow only deepened the connection between them. The chaos had become a strange dance of miscommunication, trust, and very, very awkward intimacy. By evening, they collapsed together on the floor amidst a wrecked kitchen, overturned furniture, and a lingering haze of alien spices. She rested her head on his shoulder, armor clinking softly, and whispered promises of continued loyalty. He exhaled deeply, feeling a bizarre warmth amid the exhaustion. Somehow, he had survived alien devotion, culinary disasters, and more massages than he thought possible in a lifetime. Yet, in that moment of absurd quiet, he realized he had come to appreciate her unwavering dedication, even if it pushed every human boundary he had ever known. He laughed softly, shaking his head. "You know, you're completely insane." She tilted her head, eyes sparkling. "Insanity is only a measure of devotion," she said solemnly. "And I am entirely devoted to you." He groaned dramatically, resting his forehead against his palm, but couldn't help the small smile tugging at his lips. There was something undeniably flattering about being so utterly adored, even if the form it took was terrifying, public, and thoroughly chaotic. He realized, with an odd mix of pride and exasperation, that he had never encountered anything like this in the galaxy. He had healed wounds, yes, but he had also inadvertently created a loyal, affectionate, and extremely persistent partner who would follow him to the ends of space and beyond. The evening faded into night, and he found himself lying back, letting the warrior curl beside him, still humming quietly with satisfaction. Every gesture she made was both intimate and absurd, a testament to her culture's strange interpretation of loyalty and devotion. And yet, beneath the chaos, there was a genuine connection forming, a blend of respect, admiration, and a humorously awkward attraction that neither of them could deny. He realized something important. This wasn't just a disaster to endure. It was a relationship, born from a simple act of healing, grown through misunderstanding, chaos, and over-the-top devotion. He had thought that helping her was a minor incident, a small good deed in a quiet corner of space. Now he understood that human ingenuity and patience, his calm under absurd circumstances, had earned him far more than gratitude. He had earned something far more complicated: trust, admiration, and a strangely heart-fluttering loyalty that defied both logic and comfort. By dawn, the apartment, or what remained of it, was quiet. She slept in a kneeling curl beside him, and he stared at the ceiling, exhausted but content. He had survived her loyalty, survived the public demonstrations, the kitchen disasters, and the painfully intimate rituals. He had laughed, panicked, and red-faced his way through each absurd test of devotion, and yet, despite all of it, he had felt something he hadn't anticipated: affection, warmth, and the quiet thrill of being valued in a way that transcended species, culture, and sanity. He smiled faintly to himself, knowing that tomorrow would bring more lessons, more chaos, and more absurd demonstrations of devotion. But this time, he would not dread it. Somehow, in the middle of all the madness, he had begun to enjoy it. The warrior's loyalty, strange and intense as it was, had become a part of his life, and he had to admit, reluctantly, flusteredly, that he was glad it had happened. She had sworn loyalty, yes, but she had also awakened something unexpected, a bizarre, chaotic, interspecies bond that was somehow perfect in its absurdity, hilarity, and undeniable adult intimacy. He exhaled, shaking his head with a chuckle. "I can't believe this is my life," he murmured. She opened one eye, blinked sleepily, and whispered, "It is because of you. I am yours." He groaned and smiled at the same time, realizing that resisting was pointless, surviving was optional, and somehow, he was exactly where he was supposed to be.